Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Wachowski. I'm the director of the Sugar Beet Advancement Program, which is a partnership with MSU Extension that focuses on large-scale sugar beet research, primarily on farm, working directly with the growers, doing strip trial type research. This morning, we're excited to have Dr. Jaime Willbur. She's assistant professor at MSU Plant Pathology for sugar beets and potatoes, and she'll be primarily focusing on Cercospora and Cercospora control for sugar beets.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'll be talking today about Cercospora leaf spot in sugar beets, as Dave said. Thank you for that introduction. In here in Michigan and worldwide, Cercospora leaf spot remains the number one most important foliar diseases for sugar beets. So I'll be talking today a little bit about some of our 2024 observations, as well as some management considerations going here into 2025. So back in 2020, we started to actually have these highly resistant sugar beet cultivars come into our breeding programs, into our company testing programs. And I'm showing here on the screen on the left side is a very bright green sugar beet line that has this highly resistant trait. And this is based on a background in sugar beets of a tolerant Cercospora leaf spot variety. So it has different traits and different genes that contribute to the resistance. But there's a single gene that's been added to that to elevate the resistance level to this very resistant, extremely resistant level. And on the right side is a very susceptible sugar beet. This is probably in August where we're starting to see full leaf necrosis, and this is start to be defoliation and will cause regrowth of the plant and further sugar losses. So this was back in 2020. We saw gradual adoption of our industry for these CR plus varieties, these highly resistant varieties. And in 2024, we had about 98% of our production was a highly tolerant variety with this trait. However, in 2024, I'm showing now on the screen a comparison picture of on the left side, we have one of these CR plus extremely resistant varieties, and on the right side, a traditional conventional susceptible CLS susceptible variety. And this was in August. This was in our research nursery, so this was in an inoculated environment. However, we're seeing complete leaf necrosis in both of these varieties at that time in later August. This did end up causing full defoliation and leaf regrowth. So this is something that we were experiencing in 2024. We had loss of our resistance traits. And so in 2025, most of the industries are going to be managing these highly resistant varieties as if they were back to the conventional varieties, because we've lost the effectiveness of that highly resistant gene. So they still have that background tolerance to CLS, but it's not that extreme resistance. So along with that, we had some interesting observations to do with the symptom expression. So typical Cercospora leaf spot symptoms are circular unless they're stopped by a vein. They are about the size of a pencil eraser or smaller, so certainly about a quarter inch to certainly less than half an inch, but an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch in diameter. They have this tan or gray border with a red to gray center with a red to brown border. And microscopically, what we look for as pathologists are these black pinprick-like structures in the center with silver needle-like spores under high humidity. Traditionally, across our varieties, we have some variability in the way these symptoms look. And so they can have a little bit more purple, red borders to brown or tan borders. They can be a little bit larger or a little bit smaller. but for the most part, they're that smaller circular lesion. However, in 2024, I'm showing now an example on the left side of the screen is 2022 symptoms, and on the right side, 2024 symptoms. So in 2024, we started to see um, larger lesions. So now I'm showing a more magnified picture where in 2022 we had less than about a quarter to zero point 0.4 inches of size of some of our largest lesions. And in 2024, we're starting to see about zero point 0.5 to 3/4 of an inch, so half an inch to 3/4 of an inch, some of these lesions. So quite a bit larger than what is traditionally thought to be a typical Cercospora lesion. We also started to see some of these bleeding or blurred borders, so less defined borders. They start to be a little bit more wavy at the edges and sometimes have this kind of a double border look because of a tan expanse there. We also have, with some of these larger lesions, the centers start to crack. And so we do have more cracking that we were seeing last year. And so I just want to share some of these differences to look for this year so that if there's any questions about atypical symptoms, to send them into MSU, our plant pest diagnostics, or our pathology programs here for sugar beets. We'd be happy to help diagnose any of these types of atypical symptoms. So here in Michigan, we do have a predictive model that helps us determine when that initial risk of infection occurs in our region. So based on temperature and leaf wetness, I'm showing here the beet cast DSVs or daily severity values. This is hosted by Weather Innovations. And currently in June 11th, as of yesterday, we're at pretty mild DSVs from 7 to 19 across our sugar beet growing region. Most action thresholds for fungicide initiation are in that 45 to 50 DSV range. We did have a couple of higher risk days due to rainfall, but I had to go quite a bit back into May 29th for one of the first ones of the season, and then June 5th, a little bit more recently, had some widespread elevated risk. Comparing to last year, we had in 2024, we started to see a gradual elevation of risk from May 15th to June 19th, which was about when we were presenting this last year. In this year, and around June 19th, we were just starting to reach some of those fungicide action thresholds. Here now, this year in 2025, we have not accumulated the amount of risk as we had last year. We had a little bit of accumulation earlier in May, but then we've kind of leveled off while it's been relatively cool. We've had less rain through kind of early June. However, now at June 11th, we're at 7 to 19 DSVs across the region. So we're under that threshold. However, looking into next week and the following, we'll want to be listening to Jeff's presentation here in a few minutes. Depending on that predicted rainfall in certain areas, we could see if 3 or 6 days, depending on the amount of rainfall precipitation in that area, we could see some accumulation of these DSVs to kind of catch up to where we were last year. So we're a little bit mild now, but we could potentially be at a higher risk, similar to last year, within the next week or so. So still waiting to see about regional, more local risk. Last year, we started to see our first symptoms, first spots in late June. So we'll keep an eye on this year. I'm just putting up here the infection conditions that are favorable for Cercospora baticola. Ideal is 65 to 89 degrees Fahrenheit, which we're going to see is perfect for the next couple of weeks here. And then relative humidity greater than 90% or free moisture on the leaves after rainfall, particularly. So here in my program, we have developed a, a predictive model to add some information to the existing model. So the existing model is based on an infection condition. So just based on weather conditions that are favorable for this fungus to infect. Our program has been looking at then the added information of pathogen abundance. So whether Cercospora is present in the air, is being dispersed, is sporulating. And so this is just an example of, this is actually 2025 risk predictions for the Richville Frankenmuth near our research center. But as we can see in the black line are our predicted risk of elevated spores to be present. And in the gray bars are the predicted beet cast DSBs. So this is on a 0 to 4 scale. We consider about a 3 or 4 to be elevated for infection, and we consider above 30% presence for elevated spores to be elevated for our spore model. So we can see it's been relatively low, especially on the beet cast side, through the end of May. We had one instance in early June where there was a matching, an alignment of elevated spore abundance and elevated infection. And so there may have been some potential there, but beets were pretty small. And so as we're going into the next couple of weeks, so this is something that we'll be monitoring closely to see about continued risk. Just to take away, we have many different contact and systemic fungicides that remain effective in a foliar fungicide program. However, we have been monitoring the sensitivity of Cercospora in Michigan, and these over the last 2021 to 2023. We do see some differences between our different active ingredient groups. We have generally our triazoles. We have a couple of triazoles that do a little bit, are more effective to Cercospora in the lab setting. And we have a couple prothioconazole or Proline, tetraconazole, or Domark or Eminent that are a little bit more, our Cercospora is a little bit less sensitive to. We also have some widespread insensitivity to headline or pyraclostrobin, and our tins remain fairly effective. So as of 2024, most of these trends remain the same. However, we do see a slight elevation in some of our tin insensitivities from last season. And we do see a little bit of elevation in our difenoconazole or Inspire that we'll be monitoring closely this season. That could have been from some of the extended intervals that that our industry was putting out on these resistant varieties, which would have put a little bit more selection pressure on the pathogen. So we will be monitoring this closely this year. These still have shown efficacy in programs that are have appropriate tank mix partners, full rates, and rotating these chemistries. So if there's any questions there, we will be conducting this testing again this year, but let us know. And just keep in mind that there are several other foliar diseases that are not as prevalent, but they are still occurring. We are still detecting them. And so just if there's any questions about symptoms, different looking symptoms, different looking leaf spots that are causing issues, especially with some of the rainfall that we'll be expecting, we are welcoming any and all samples to be sent our way, and we can help with that. With that, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you for the time this morning, and I'll be happy to take any questions after Jeff's presentation.
Jamie, I know
Thank you,
you
Steve.
were answering them in the chat here. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and maybe answer
Yeah.
those out loud for people who are unable to view, that'd be great.
Yes, yep. I was just trying to keep track of the questions and my thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for the great questions. And Dave, you can add to any of these as well, but I'll kind of go through from the top. Clay Atoni, was the 2024 loss of resistance due to the pathogens changing, poor gene editing, and or other? And so this is likely due to Cercospora, the pathogen changing to overcome that single gene that was contributing the extreme resistance to the varieties. Cercospora reproduces several times per season, approximately every 7 to 10 days, if under favorable conditions. And so it's able to adapt pretty quickly. And we have been adopting these varieties over the last 3 to 4 years with when effective, it was consistent and uniform within a field. So that seemed to be fairly uniform. The change, however, genetically is being confirmed by researchers out in North Dakota, Minnesota, and in the Red River Valley. Anything to add to that, Dave? Cool. The next question was about the status and presence of Cercospora strains on sugar beets in the state of Michigan. And so we do have a diverse population of Cercospora due to that ability to reproduce fairly quickly. The triazole resistance that we see, and I clarified this with Julius, the triazole resistance that we see in the lab are thought to be largely due to some genetic mutations. And this is seen out in the Red River Valley, and we've done some preliminary analyses here in Michigan. So we do believe that these mutations are emerging in our populations, but they can be slowed. This emergence can be slowed by the chemical rotation of active ingredients and tank mix partners, using tank mix partners as well as other resistance management strategies. Justine's question was about, did you observe similar spore production in the larger lesions that you would see in typical size lesions? So this is, there is potential for more sporulating structures in those larger lesions. So when we looked at those lesions under the microscope, we can see more of those black pinpricks. So potentially they could produce more spores. However, we didn't look at the rate of spore production in those lesions. I can say that in our inoculated, non-treated nursery area, that the disease progression was followed a relatively similar trend. So it wasn't necessarily faster in the resistant varieties, which I would expect if it was producing a lot more spores. But it did tend to, in the resistant varieties, disease started maybe a week or so later than in the susceptible, but then they kind of increased at a similar rate. And then had a question about if both Cercospora and Alternaria are present in a field, how would our fungicide recommendations change? So that's a great question. We do have fields where both Cercospora and Alternaria can occur together. In about 10% of the lesions that we saw from diagnostic samples last year, we saw Cercospora and Alternaria together. But about 80% of the time, it was still Cercospora alone causing the majority of the problem. There were about 10% of samples maybe that had Alternaria only causing the issues. But luckily, we do have fungicides and fungicide groups that remain effective for both of these, control of both of these fungi. This includes difenoconazole or Inspire, methyltrifluconazole, Provosol, or Veltima, and TINs are about equivalently effective in lab testing for both Alternaria and Cercospora. However, Alternaria, we do see is more frequently resistant to thiophanate methyl or topsin. So we have over 75%, 80% of the population of Alternaria is resistant to topsin, and we do test for Alternaria also. I just didn't go into that today, but if there's any questions specifically about that, you can contact me and we can talk later. There was another question from Teresa about the same fungicides applied to many of the crops in addition to sugar beets in the Saginaw Valley and Thumb area. How does this impact the speed of resistance development? So this is a great question. In terms of Cercospora baticola going to other crops, that will not likely happen unless it's closely related to sugar beets. So if it's spinaches or something along the leafy green side. However, there are some weed species such as lamb's quarter that could be a host for Cercospora. So if other field crops, if lamb's quarter in another field of a different field crop could be harboring some of that pathogen, and in that case, a fungicide applied to that field crop could impact the Cercospora baticola population, but it shouldn't be as widespread across the field as it would be in a sugar beet field, if that makes sense. Dave, anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah.
All right. And Clay, one more question I see here. With the multiple generations and mutations, are there any possible biological controls? So there are, we have tested a few different biological options. We have tested these in our inoculated nurseries alongside some of our typical conventional programs. We have not seen equivalent control of some of these biocontrols, but there have been some that appear to add a little bit of efficacy into a program. However, these have been typically tested in a little bit more tolerant varieties. So they work with some of the resistance mechanisms in the plant. They have to kind of rely on there being a healthy plant there. So we haven't found anything that's been effective in a fully susceptible variety, but we have seen particularly the double nickel in some of our testing has shown to add a little bit, but it's not equivalent to, say, a copper or other conventional fungicides. And then I think, Jeff, maybe there was a couple of questions for you then.
And I saw one question. I just tried to get it back in the chat here regarding the smoke. And I apologize. I did actually want to talk about the smoke. We will be probably, given our forecast and given the way the upper airflow looks like here over the next couple of weeks, we probably will be seeing at least a few days of hazy skies. And the question, well, does it have impacts on crops? And it's, of course, the most important question for us. And the answer, at least, it isn't completely clear, but the impacts are thought to be relatively minor. Maybe at worst. And one of the factors here that is relevant, especially this year, is that as the smoke goes through, where is it in the atmosphere? And so far this year in Michigan, and there would be some exception in upper Michigan, but most of the smoke has been elevated above the surface. And so yes, while we had definitely had hazy skies and sort of the vivid, sometimes the red sunsets, etc., we didn't sense it on the ground, and there didn't have smoke. It didn't smell like a campfire. Now that, again, there were some, at least one instance I know in Upper Michigan where that was the case, and I also would note that we had certainly much more of this in the last year when there were more fires and burning, and there was just more smoke in general. And some of that smoke did make it down to the surface. That's unusual. That's a different story, and where the crops are physically directly in that smoke. But part of this year, most of it has been elevated, and we just skies. One impact that is known about, or we could see and observe when we do see those really hazy days, and we've had a couple of them so far with this particular season. The fire season, by the way, in places like central Canada and Western Canada is generally June through the end of the summer or early fall into September. So that's when we would expect these things. It has been relatively dry in those areas, which is why we have the fires. But there currently now are more than 200 wildfires in progress because of the long-term conditions there. But it's not as much as what we saw last year. And I think that's one lesson. The other one is, again, back to the impact. When we do see those hazy days, we see our daytime maximum temperatures usually a little cooler than they would be otherwise. There's not as much solar energy getting down to the surface. And so that's one that we can point at and say, well, it's, and some physiologists and people who do really have a specialty in this particular type of thing suggest that in some cases that might be a positive thing, that we keep the daytime temperatures a little cooler than they would be otherwise. The distinction, though, that we also need to think about again, where is that smoke, and when it's actually in the and that's where the science is still working to figure out. When we do have smoke concentrations out there physically in the crop canopy, what happens? And that's still being determined. It's certainly probably not favorable, but again, as everything, how much, how long was the exposure? And we will, given the conditions, though, I think it is likely that we will see a few more days of this on occasion, and it'll alternate. There'll be one day where we'll see haze, and then the next day will probably be fine or more normal. But we're in that season, and given the number of fires that are burning again to our north and west, it's something we're likely going to see for a few weeks. Oh, it looks I see here too.
Yeah.
Another question: how much additional rain would it take to supply crops in the dry subsoil areas? Right, it depends on locations, but the driest area we have that we're watching right now, relative to normal, really the Saginaw Valley, and then into the Thumb. That's where we would see the long-term driest conditions, and there the deficits are on the order of a couple inches, maybe 2, 3, 4 inches. If we look at the whole profile, if we look at the top 3 feet, it would be a considerable amount of water needed to bring things back up to normal. But remember, right now we're coming into really the period of max water and the sweeps and progresses here. That's when that said, given year, it's like a bank account you've got in reserve. The same applies for the water, and you really would like to have at least near normal amounts of water in the soil as we move into that really those water sensitive stages here, especially during the months of July and then in August, when the crop water needs will exceed typically what we go with precip. So that's always each season that's a big factor, and right now. Again, it would be nice to have a couple of inches in that central of the state to make a difference. What happens here as June goes on?
Okay. I'm not sure I've seen any other questions in the chat, but before we sign off, I would like to know Kyle Rolfe is on the call here today. He's a new hire to MSU Extension and is working as a research assistant in the Sugar Beet Advancement Program. So certainly nobody is more excited than myself to have some help and be able to work on individual trials with growers and looking at varieties and looking at things like Cercospora control and methods and that. Obviously, we're cooperating with Jamie and things like that. So super excited. It's been a little while since the advancement program has been full staff, and we're back to there. Thank you to the extension service, for being committed and backfilling some positions that have been open for a while, and super excited to have Kyle on board, who has recently just graduated from Michigan State, and yeah, looking forward to a lot of bright and good things coming from him. So with that, I I didn't see any additional questions in the chat. I don't know if anyone else did that. Maybe I may have missed.
Any specialists have comments?
Yeah, this is Marty. I have a quick update. So, tar spot has been found in northern Indiana and Kansas. So this doesn't mean we should panic or anything. And in fact, even in those regions, last year they had some early detections, but yet the best fungicide's timing was still at that VTR1 growth stage. But just want to let you all know that, tar spot has been found. Those cool, wet conditions that we had were ideal. As it warms up, conditions won't be as favorable. Cool temperatures are really sort of essential for that disease to really blow up. So we'll just have to see how the season goes, but just want to give you a heads up as to those findings. Thanks.
Hey, and it's Chris here talking about bugs. It's been pretty quiet. The few questions I've had, a little bit of slug, maybe a cutworm field or two, kind of like dribs and drabs, a little bit of cereal leaf beetle. But for most of these things, we just need some good growth on the corn and beans to have them grow out of that kind of early season damage. And there isn't anything yet on the kind of on the radar south to north that I've seen that of any concern yet. So.
Awesome. Thanks for those updates from our specialists. Nothing else, Dave, you can feel free to take us home.
Okay, well, again, I want to thank everyone for joining this morning. Anyone has any questions, Cercospora, sugar beet related, please feel free to reach out to either Dr. Willbur or myself, and we'll do what we can to get your questions answered. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.